parenting.
The child welfare system is a set of services that support children and families to make sure that they have a safe and adequate space to live and grow. Well, supposedly. Child welfare consists of programs like housing assistance, parenting skills classes, and foster care, which sets up a system where children can be separated from parents that are deemed unfit. Hollywood has glorified the experiences of kids in foster care with multiple iterations of Orphan Annie. But unlike My Forever Annie, portrayed by Quvenzhané Wallis, the reality is that most Black kids in the system don't have that fairy tale ending. In 2018, Black children represented 14% of the kids in the US, but 23% of all kids in foster care. And just like so much else in this country, in order to get an idea of exactly how the child welfare system got this way, we've got to take it back.
I start by going all the way back to slavery and the enslavement of Black families in the United States, because during that system, white enslavers put themselves in the position of being in control of the entire plantation family, which included Black parents and children.
Dorothy Roberts is a professor of law, Africana studies, and sociology at the University of Pennsylvania. Roberts is also the author of Shattered Bonds, The Color of Child Welfare.
On the auction block, families were often put up for sale and children sold off to other enslavers separate from the mothers and fathers.
And even after emancipation, the separation of Black families was still a thing. Take a look at apprenticeship, for example. In this practice, kids were sent away to work for other families.
There was rampant apprenticeship of Black children by courts who gave these children over, sometimes to their former enslavers. This was very common.
And this cruel system of separating children from their families has harmed multiple communities throughout history. In the 1800s, the U.S. government took thousands of indigenous youth from their families as a form of psychological warfare, putting the kids in boarding schools with the intention of whitewashing them. Roberts also notes orphan trains as a significant forerunner to our current child welfare system. This practice sent hundreds of thousands of homeless, poor, white immigrant children from major cities like New York to the Midwest to work on farms in exchange for room and board. In the early 20th century, the federal government finally decided that it wanted to save the children. Some of the first federal proposals were instituting a national foster care system, expanding adoption agencies, and providing monetary aid through mothers' pensions to keep these families intact. The mothers' pensions were for white widows or white women without husbands. Black women were left high and dry from the greater child welfare movement until the civil rights movement, that is.
Free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Part of the civil rights movement was to extend social welfare, which included Social Security, and Medicaid and Medicare and other kinds of public benefits to support families from which Black people have been excluded. And so what happens is when Black families began to be included in child welfare services, these programs began to become much more punitive.
As Black kids were folded into the child welfare system in the 1950s and 60s, more money was designated to foster care, which by nature breaks families apart.
What happens as more and more Black children enter the child welfare roles is that foster care becomes the major so-called service. And we see an explosion of the foster care population simultaneously with this development of stingier, more stigmatized welfare benefits up to the basic abolition of the federal entitlement to welfare.
So social programs that were once used to support white families are now used to control Black families. And those same programs disproportionately regulate and investigate Black families too. Roberts says that part of this disparity is due to the racist ideology that Black mothers were harming their children. And this damaging and problematic way of thinking is a weapon still being used against Black parents and families today.
We can go back to slavery as the origins of this idea that white people need to save Black children from their.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CASA LA's Fireside Chat, and Happy New Year. This is our first Fireside Chat of 2024. I am Charity Chandler-Cole, the CEO of CASA of LA. At CASA LA, which stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates, we organize the community to show up in life and in court to advocate for children and families in LA County's overburdened child welfare and juvenile justice systems. Through an intentional, restorative, and culturally responsive lens, we train a village of committed, consistent, and caring adults who provide equitable, life-affirming connections. Our vision is a Los Angeles County in which all children and families have equitable access to the resources and support they need to be whole and thrive. Our mission and vision cannot be accomplished until our children live in a world that is equitable and just. That's why we are committed to doing our part to address racial injustice in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems, and using this platform, our Fireside Chats, to bring communities and various stakeholders together to have real conversations about what's happening in the world of child welfare in LA County, with the hope of building awareness, informing our communities, activating a safe space for all, and strengthening our ability to advocate for our youth. On the back of celebrating the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and as we move into Black History Month, I thought fitting to land today's discussion on foster care being a civil rights issue. And today, I have the privilege and honor of introducing you to a phenomenal group of people, all of whom are dedicated to transforming the lives of our youth and families in LA County and beyond. First up, we have Minouche Kandel, who is a senior staff attorney in the LGBTQ Gender and Reproductive Justice Project at the ACLU of Southern California. Minouche's current areas of focus are sex work decriminalization, the family policing system, and pregnancy lactation accommodations in the workplace. Minouche was previously the Women's Policy Director at the San Francisco Department of the Status of Women, DOSW, where she helped to coordinate San Francisco's response to domestic violence and human trafficking. Prior to working at DOSW, Minouche worked in the area of domestic violence for over 20 years, most of that time as a staff attorney at Bay Area Legal Aid, where she represented survivors of intimate partner violence and family law cases. Minouche is a recipient of the 2008 California Lawyer Attorney of the Year and the Daily Journal's 2009 Top 100 Lawyers in California. Minouche got her BA from Yale University and her JD from Harvard Law School. Up next, we have Chris Martin, who is a lawyer, community organizer, singer, and songwriter. Okay, we are eclectic out here. He grew up in South Central Los Angeles, where he graduated from Dorsey High School in 2006. He then attended the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he graduated with a double major in English and history and holds a Juris Doctorate from the University of California, Hastings College of Law. At UC Hastings, Chris served as co-president of the Black Law Student Association. In 2018, Chris became the director of the legal team for Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. Through his work with BLM-LA, Chris helped organize a team of over 700 lawyers to reach out to 900 protesters who were arrested for protesting the killing of George Floyd, and successfully negotiated with LA City Attorney and District Attorney to drop all charges against most of them. In 2020, Chris began organizing with the Reimagine Child Safety Coalition, which is dedicated to community organizing for families who are trying to either stay together or get back together after they became entangled within the foster care system. And last but certainly not least, and we got some amazing people, y'all, so I'm gonna read every word of these bios. We have Keshia Dorsey, who is the ultimate trifecta. Keshia has had the privilege of advocating on behalf of thousands of families at risk of family separation and the civil death penalty, i.e. termination of parental rights. As a family defense attorney, Keshia uses a holistic approach when advocating on behalf of parents in juvenile dependency cases. She also litigates civil rights cases and sues the government when CPS unlawfully separates families and or fails to protect children in the foster system. She uses her experience, which includes nearly a decade of litigation as a trial attorney in state and federal court, and her own personal journey through the foster care system herself, to look beyond the surface of a CPS petition and see real families, their strength, their traumas, and their healing. Keshia fundamentally believes that families belong together and that families in crisis should be afforded a meaningful opportunity to maintain their sacred family bonds. In addition to serving as a family defender, Keshia is also an activist and educator. She currently serves as an adjunct professor at her alma mater, Southwestern Law School, where she graduated at the top of her class and teaches about the foster to prison pipeline. She is also a member of the Black Mothers March Steering Committee, the American Bar Association's Commission on Youth at Risk, as well as a member of Black Lives Matter Reimagine Child Safety Coalition. Keshia is also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, aka, and a proud Child Lawyers College graduate. When not seeking and delivering justice for families, Keshia enjoys spending time with her husband and beautiful baby girl. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us, and welcome to our Fireside Chat. For the audience, we'll take a few questions towards the end if time permits, so please submit a question if you have one in the Q&A. So let's get into it. It's no secret, because we have been talking about for quite some time now, that Black and Native American children and families are disproportionately impacted by the foster care system. We've talked about mandated reporting, line removal, the drastic outcomes that children exiting the system are almost destined to experience, such as incarceration, homelessness, and poverty. And we've even talked through some pretty good opportunities to leverage and lean into our collective responsibility to do something about it. Today, we're here to shine a light on a pressing issue often overlooked in mainstream discourse: foster care as a civil rights issue. Civil rights refers to the rights of individuals to receive equal treatment and to be free from unfair treatment or discrimination in a number of settings, such as education, employment, housing, and more, based on certainly legally protected characteristics, such as race, gender, age, disability, nationality, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity. The list goes on. Thus, civil rights are about ensuring fairness and preventing bias in the treatment of individuals based on their inherent characteristics or identities. And they play a crucial role in maintaining a just and equitable society. So I'm going to throw a question to the group, and anyone can take the lead. As we look at equal rights, how does the overrepresentation of minority children, particularly African American and Native American children, in the foster care system highlight systemic inequalities? And further, how does this reflect broader civil rights concerns? I'd like to get us started.
I guess I'll get us started. That's all right with everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. So one thing that I've seen is that in a lot of situations, white families, do the same things that Black and brown families do, but they're just simply not being prosecuted for it. I mean, they're getting the services that they need without DCFS intervention. One of the things that really sticks out to me is, there's a lot of cases involving substance abuse, right? Drug addicted parents, or parents who've been accused of having drug addictions, and therefore, not being able to take care of their children, right? In the vast majority of those kind of cases, I primarily see parents from hospitals that are more likely to be attended by Black and brown people. You know what I mean? For example, like LACUSC, right? Or the county hospital, right? Those are going to be the hospitals that are going to be the most likely to get the referrals. I rarely see anything from Cedars-Sinai Hospital. You know what I mean? Does that mean that people or parents who go to Cedars-Sinai don't have drug addiction issues? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means that Cedars-Sinai is not reporting. And they don't have to report, right? So the question then becomes, like, why is it that the hospitals that white people are more likely to go to, they don't have to report, but the ones that Black people and brown people, indigenous people, poor people have to go to, those are the ones that have to report? And why is that?
Yeah. And furthermore, those hospitals are probably offering support when they see opportunities such as mental health, substance use. They probably don't see poverty, but they see other issues where they're like, here's a referral, here's some information, here's a resource. And instead of being reported, they're being supported. Anyone else want to chime in on that? Keshia, I see you came off mic.
Yeah, I'll hop in on that. I mean, I wanted to say, I mean, when we talk, just to piggyback off of this conversation regarding, I think what is essentially the over-policing of communities of color, Black communities, Indigenous communities, there was a time in which Black children were largely excluded from the system. And then that time wasn't so far ago, right? In the 1960s, we were very much so not really represented in the foster system. One of the rules, and I don't want to get too into the law and all that stuff on this call, but something that I actually found out about just a few years ago was a rule called the Fleming Rule, which essentially was passed in 1961, where state plans were required, they could not impose an eligibility condition that would deny financial assistance with respect to needy children on the basis that home conditions in which the child lived were unsuitable, which we still use that term today, while the child continued to reside in the home. And so there was a law essentially that was passed that said that we had to provide financial assistance to families to, protect them and to give them the support that they needed. And then there was an exception to that rule that said, if the home is deemed to be unsuitable, that public assistance could either be made to improve the home conditions or arrangements made for a child to live elsewhere, right? And so I guess what's happening simultaneously with the Fleming Rule, right, is the civil rights movement, Black women, right, largely at the forefront of getting Black women, access to welfare benefits, which is why we were excluded initially, because we didn't have, right, the right to have access to welfare benefits. And then you see this huge influx of Black children into the foster system, right? And the data on that is literally I think it was a 67% increase in the number of children in the foster system, right? Largely Black children, largely disproportionately also Native children. And so we talk about just that systemic inequality, right? Just the over policing of our communities. And when Chris talks about just the substance use disorder, what I see is, when we look at, again, I'm a data person, but looking at data, drug use in this country is a thing. That's what we do. We use drugs, we pop pills, right? That is what we do in the United States. I am a part of a profession that has one of the highest rates of substance use disorder, and CPS does not come in and snatch in my colleagues' children or the judges, quite frankly, their children, right? And a drug test is not a parenting test, right? Just because someone uses drugs does not mean that they cannot raise their children, right? And so when we talk about civil rights implications, we're talking about the literally threat of destruction of families. And even if it's not a destruction, it's still the intervention into families that's unnecessary and unwarranted, right? That disrupts family integrity. And that's that's what's happening. It's not we always talk about these in terms of children's rights versus parents' rights. It's a family right, that's being happening, or just a threat. And so, I mean, I know we're gonna get into more deeper, so I don't want to put it all out there now, but the implications that I see, really honestly, it's just the over policing of our families, and unnecessary over policing, right? Such that children who actually do need to be protected are not being protected by our county, and not because we're too busy over policing communities and individuals who don't need to be policed.
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't want it to go over our head, something you said, because and I talk about this a lot, so I want to kind of highlight it more here. So you're saying that there was a Fleming Rule that basically helped support needy families who primarily at the time were white families, white widow families, by the way, who were widowed because of World War II. And Black people were originally excluded from the New Deal, so we were not able to even participate in the child welfare system. So while our children were walking around hungry and barefoot and poor, and literally Black mothers breastfeeding other babies while our children were being neglected and, you know, not fed, and we weren't even able to support our children the way we wanted to because we were supporting other families, it was okay to provide that assistance to other families when they didn't look like us. But the second funding was tied to supporting Black and brown families. All of a sudden, there's a we'll accept you, we want you, but while we're marching for our civil rights, while we're marching for jobs, equality, education, and housing, what we got was a system that said, yes, you're welcome, but we're going to change the rules on you because you're not that parent, you are this parent. So we're going to now over police and over surveil you. And so what we got were laws and policies that were benevolently disguised as protection, but were actually doing the exact opposite of creating the equality that we hoped to get and receive, that white mothers received at the time, which is why the foster care in general is a civil rights issue in and of itself. So I'm gonna stop there because I don't want that to get above us, that there was a trickery going on. We thought we were getting something, but we actually bought into something that was even more harmful and detrimental to our families and our communities that we're experiencing the extraordinary consequence of today. Okay, just want to make sure I got that. All right. Thank you. Minouche, did you want to touch this one before we?
Yeah, just quickly maybe to add on to Keshia's history lesson and Dr. Roberts' history lesson, because I think sometimes we think California is better. And so I just want to highlight that from its very founding, California had the same problematic separation of Black and Indigenous families as the rest of the nation. And in fact, the very first legislature that convened in California in 1850 passed a law that allowed white people to go to court and bring an Indian child before a judge and say that the parents or a friend had agreed that this person could have the care, control, and earnings of the child until they were 18. And so basically they were enslaving the child, the Indigenous child, until they were 18. And this led to kidnapping of Native children in the state who were then essentially sold into slavery through this court mechanism. So, you know, California, no better than the rest of the country.
And I'm glad
we are the largest local system in the country, right? And again, like you said, Minouche, it's so crazy. I go to these conferences and they're like bragging about Cali and the progressiveness, and I'm like, we're not progressive, right? Our families are being destroyed in this state as well.
Absolutely.
Can I say the statistic? I'm sure you've said it a lot of times, Charity, but in case this is somebody's first fireside chat, that I'm not good with remembering numbers, but this number is like seared in my brain, because in LA County, 58% of Black children will experience a family policing investigation before they turn 18. 58%. I mean, how can we see that number and just not be horrified?
Yeah. I think it's 1 in 4 families will experience an investigation. So if you got more than 4 kids, at least one of your kids will be investigated. And if one of your kids are investigated, that means all your kids are investigated. I think I want to say 100%, I have 4 sisters, 100% of our children have experienced some type of involvement with the child welfare system. 100% of us, which is insane. And so when we talk about children and children's rights and well-being, so we've created a system that says it can do a better job of parenting children than the families themselves. And then we have children who enter these systems and the foster care system fails to provide safe and nurturing environments for the children, which is kind of mind-boggling for me. And I want to kind of talk about how these failures intersect with the violation of children's civil rights. You know, you talked earlier about Keshia, about children's rights, parents' rights, but family rights. And we're going to get into that one next. But I want to talk about, we uplift the child's best interest in this work, right?
Allegedly.
But when the child is in the system, they don't have a voice. They're not really asked what they need or how they need it. Their love for their parents and desire to stay united and connected with their families is completely disregarded. And we've created our own definition of what a child's best interest is, and that ends once they're removed from their family, but we're not keeping that same energy, as we like to say, when they're in the system. We're not holding the system accountable to that child's best interest while we're there. So can we talk about how that in and of itself is a civil rights issue? Because we're not giving them equal access to schools, to placement, to education, to mental health, or any of these other things that children who are even on the same footing as them when it comes to socioeconomic status, children in foster care system fare far worse. So you're pulling them out of impoverished and other situations so that they can fare worse. Help me make sense of this, because I'm just a little confused on how that works.
I don't know that we can make sense of it. But I always say that, like, if we held CPS to the same standard that we hold parents to, they wouldn't get RFA approved. Like, they would not get approved to take care of anybody's children, right? I mean, you talked about some of the challenges or the things that children face in the system, but children are more likely to be abused in the system, right? And as far as like medication of children, the educational instability, right? The failure to provide children with the therapy that they need to be like when they're being taken from their parents. And I also like, you know, there's our state does not even allow for like judges to take into consideration that these harms that we're talking about when they are depriving a child of their family, right? And when we talk, I don't say foster care, I say foster system. I don't think the system cares for children. I don't think that it is providing for the welfare of children. I don't believe that it is providing for the best interest of children, because if it were, we would be looking at the data, we'd be looking at the research that shows that children will far better with their families, right? And we would support them, right? We're paying out thousands of dollars, right? $1,000 to $2,609. Look that up. Like, to foster parents to take care of children when we could be giving that support to families. And we refuse to do it. It's a refusal. It's not we can't. It is, we are making a decision not to do this, right? And if we're saying we care and that we care about the welfare and that we're doing what's in the best interest, we wouldn't do that.
Right.
And foster parents, you know, listen, I don't know how much I can share, but like, I have cases where children are abused in their foster homes or they're not being treated properly. They don't have their clothes. They're coming to visits with the same clothes on they had the last time that they had the visit. And no one's doing anything about it. They're not removing those children from the home, giving them back to their parents, right? And so the standard of care, I guess, of what a parent is being expected to do is not what the system is doing far worse.
Right.
And it just seems like it's okay. Like no one, and it, like you said, make it make sense. I don't know how to make sense of it. I don't know how to make sense of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just add that when you consider the notion that ultimately the child's desire to stay in a home once DCFS gets involved carries little weight in those court proceedings. It effectively means for me that they don't really have too many civil rights. You know, certainly parents don't, as it pertains to you know, the juvenile dependency system. You know, again, as you spoke about, you know, the best interests of the child, and you know how that's certainly something that is supposed to be considered in court. It's just like, you know, what the child actually thinks is in their best interests. It carries little weight. You know, they're given a guardian ad litem who, you know, makes those decisions for the child. You know, oftentimes it can be contrary to what the child wants. So, I mean,
yeah, 100%. I agree. Keshia, and I'll let you hop in here too if you want to, Minouche, but you talk about liking the data, you know, and I think the part that drives me insane is that we have the data when it comes to the outcomes these children are having, which correlate to the experiences they're having in the system with the instability in education, instability in housing, not being seen and valued. When we look at all the issues that our country is literally trying to address right now, which, if the governor ever hears this, you cannot defund funding going towards child welfare work unless it's, I'm okay with defunding it from the system itself. But we have so many organizations that are in the trenches trying to help children that are disproportionately impacted by the child welfare. I'm gonna go by the foster system. We have many advocates like CASA LA, I'm gonna be specific, I don't speak for all CASAs, but CASA LA and others that are advocating for these kids and prevention efforts that are underway that we're defunding. When we are funding incarceration, we're funding efforts to address homelessness, we're somewhat funding efforts to address poverty. And when we look at the population of children, of people that comprise those populations, the majority of them come from the foster care system. There was data at one point that said upwards of 70% of the people that were in California's prison system were former foster youth. But we failed to address it at this level. We failed to make these investments. We'll pay STRTPs more for the same child than we'll pay a relative caregiver, or even give to the parent to support them. And we have to ask ourselves why. And we know why. We know it's by design. We know that these systems need children to be warehoused into the child welfare system. They need us to fail in these systems. They need to criminalize and punish parents, because by doing so, we can guarantee that, and we can not only guarantee, but we can justify needing all of these other programs later to address poverty and homelessness and incarceration, when we could solve all those problems now by stop oppressing and punishing and criminalizing Black families, poor families, and brown families. And as an African-American woman, Black woman, I am sick and tired of paying taxes for services that I know my people will not benefit from. It is literally taxation without representation. And so when we have the data that says we think we can do a better job of parenting children, we have data that shows we cannot, but we continue to fund and support these efforts and criminalize families in the process, how is that serving children? How is that helping children? And as someone that has experienced the foster care system, no one asked me how I was faring when I was in the system. When we had court hearings or anything else, it was always, what was my parent doing? What were other outside forces doing? Never, how is your group home? How are the people you're interacting with? How is your social worker? How is so-and-so? If they would have asked, I would have told them that I, dreamed about killing myself every night. I would have told them that the food was horrible. I would have told them that people treated us as if we were nothing, that they literally told us we were nothing. And this isn't for all foster, and there are amazing foster parents out there. There are a lot of kids that have great experiences in the foster system, but it is not the majority. It is not the majority. And so we have to ask ourselves, how is this helping kids? And we're doing them an incredible disservice if we know that as a result of our intervention and interaction, and mind you, we're not talking about kids that are actually being abused. 88% of the kids in the system are here because of neglect that stems from poverty. So we're not talking about those families that absolutely need intervention, that absolutely need support. We're talking about all the other families that we say we care about, who we are setting up to fail and to not have equal grounding and footing when it comes to employment and housing and access to college. Forget college, graduating high school. This is a major civil rights issue. Major. And this is not something we get to say is an individual problem. It's that child, it's that parent. It is a systemic problem. And we have to reckon with that. We didn't march in the our parents and grandparents didn't march in the civil rights movement for half-ass rights. we wanted all of it. And that trickles down to how our children and our communities and families are being handled in these systems that are literally setting us up to fail. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about families. Let's talk about family integrity and parental rights. How does the removal of children from their families, especially in our more marginalized Black, brown, and poor communities, relate to a civil rights issue? And what are the challenges in ensuring that there is fair and adequate support for these parents? And I know, Keshia, that's your specialty. So if you want to kick us off, let us know.
So, yeah. I'm happy to do so. So I think part of the challenge is that we talk about things in terms of children's rights versus parents' rights as opposed to family rights, right? Like the families have a right to be together. Families deserve to have their bonds to be protected, to be respected, right? And the implications are like, I honestly consider the system to be genocidal. Like, I really do. Like, I think it's like a destruction of our entire bloodlines, right? The number one indicator of whether or not a child's going to go into the system is if their mother was in the system themselves, right? And people are disconnected from grandparents, aunties, uncles, right? I know for myself, right? Just talking like my siblings and I are the top of our family tree. That's a problem, right? And so when we talk about just the civil rights implications and removals and things like that, there are civil rights that protect that. There are 1983 claims that could be made for the unlawful removal of children, right? We have a right as for children, it's under the Fourth Amendment, right? Children have a right not to be seized from their parents, right? Without a warrant, without exigent circumstances, right? Or consent. What I see when we talk about civil rights is social workers telling parents that they have to allow for them to have access to their children or to come into their homes, right? I've seen parents get punished for not surrendering their children to the social worker when the social worker demands for a child to be surrendered, right? All of those are viable civil rights claims, right? And parents have a reciprocal right to that Fourth Amendment right as the person who's not being seized to file, a claim under the 14th Amendment, right? And then there's been, I don't know if in California we've done that, but I know in other states, they've been successful in even getting civil rights litigation in cases where they forced family members to leave the home, right? So we see that happening where we see a separation of family where social workers will say, the only way that we're going to allow for you to keep your child in your home is if dad, you move out or mom, you move out, right? And they make a parent move out and they're causing separation and division within the household, right? So there are, I guess, ways in which for those ones are more clearly defined than some of the other, civil rights violations. But even piggybacking on that, like in terms of like, again, not making it about children's and parents' rights, but like children and parents, they have the right to know for their children to be safe while they're in the system.
Right.
You're going to take my baby from me where they've never, in most cases, have ever been harmed by me, right? And now my child is being harmed in the system. Now my child has been to multiple different schools in one school year. Now my child is on multiple, psychotropic medications. I think they said the average is like 3 medications, 4 medications for children in the system. These medications haven't even been tested on minors, right? And so parents, that's a right too. Children have a right not to be over medicated. Parents have a right for their children not to be over medicated when they're in the system, right? So those are just some of the things, right? That it's like, that I see that I'm just like, it's disgusting. Or Chris, you're talking about babies being removed, right? And I posted about this the other day. I had a client literally like 3 o'clock in the morning, like police officers banging on her door to take her baby from her, right? And the social worker lying to the judge, saying that the judge that my client left the hospital against medical advice. I get the records. I literally wept because the records are like, baby is doing well in mom's care. And the doctor had signed off at noon that day. And what she really did is she left because they wanted her to talk to CPS, and she had already spoken to them twice. Her sister does movement work. Her sister advised her, you can get an attorney. You don't have to talk to them without an attorney. So she left the hospital, right? And then they filed a petition and they took her baby from her. She hasn't been able to breastfeed her baby. This is her first child, right? And literally, and they never served a warrant. They said, oh, she had to surrender the baby. And I'm like, she's represented, right, by counsel at this point. I'm like, can you send us the warrant? If there's a warrant, we're going to comply with the warrant. They never send the warrant. We get the warrant in court. They said, we never executed the warrant because she didn't surrender the baby. Like, what parent, right, is going to just surrender their child, right? For just right. And so I just feel like we have to do more to, I think as a community, to like raise awareness about what's happening in regards to people trying to exercise their Fourth Amendment rights, their First Amendment rights, right? Because people are literally getting penalized for, exercising those rights. And that is a civil rights violation. But you got to have more people to file these lawsuits, right? If it's going to make an impact otherwise, the counties are going to keep doing it, right? The judges are literally like, well, your client didn't comply, but she didn't have to, right? Like judges are even complicit in this. Social workers are getting warrants because they're like, oh, she wouldn't speak to me without a lawyer. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Minouche. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that there are also so many areas in which people in this system do not have basic due process rights that are pretty shocking, and that actually some people in the family policing system have less due process rights than people in the criminal justice system. So there's no equivalent of like a Miranda warning where social workers have to tell people about what their rights are. People have a right to an attorney, but only once a case has been filed, which your kid can even be removed. Like, so one of the demands of our Reimagine Child Safety Coalition is to try and create some of these rights. Like, people should have an attorney the minute DCFS starts investigating. People should be told about their rights. People should be able to record their interactions so that they can have evidence of, because so many times we hear people saying that the social worker lies, as he says, or completely misrepresents what the parent said. So I think what's shocking is that, yes, people have a lot of rights under the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, but then there are also some pretty basic rights that they do not have, even fewer than people in the criminal justice system, which is kind of shocking.
Wow. And the rights they do have, they don't know. So we have to make sure parents are made aware of their rights. And I know New York was introducing legislation to have similar to Miranda rights, something that where parents are notified of their rights. And I hope that's something we bring forward in California. And if not, let's get together and write a white paper and get someone to introduce it. But parents don't know their rights. So we're ill-equipped and we don't know, can I say no? What do I do? And the fear of, if I don't comply, if I don't smile and act like everything's okay, that I'm going to be punished for how I respond to you wanting to take my child. So, and I see there's a question around medication. We're going to get to that because I definitely want to talk about that. But Chris, I wanted to give you some space.
Minouche took the words right out of my mouth. That was exactly the point that I was going to make about it. I mean, one of the ways that DCFS is able to, get away with removing so many families is that they're able to limit severely the rights of families to protect themselves, right? So she already, spoke about the fact that, criminal defendants do definitely have more rights than I would say families do, certainly more than parents do, right? They're not Mirandized. There is no right to record. They're not warned that DCFS is an adversarial party to them, right? There is no real right to remain silent, right? The right to remain silent is going to be used against the parent, right? So that parent is failing to cooperate, and therefore the allegations must be true, and that kid must be removed. You know what I mean? So, yeah, Minouche, she took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah,
right. And Minouche, maybe you could do some research into this, but I've been doing a little bit of research because social workers are government officials. I don't understand why we can't record them. I think that's a rule that they made up that we've been complying with, but I don't think that I haven't found anything that says we can't record social workers. They are the family police. We can record, even though we're a two-party state, we can record law enforcement, right? And I don't see why we can't record social workers. I think they're government officials. They are agents of the government. And so, I think, listen, I don't want to get people in trouble, but I'm just like, why can't we record, right? Especially if they're coming into your home, you definitely can record in your home. Listen, I know for a fact.
And if they're not causing harm and doing what they're supposed to do, what's the problem?
Right. What is exactly if the report is going to reflect what the recording says, it shouldn't matter, right? We should want the judge to have the accurate information, right? But yeah, there's the right to I think the family police are more powerful than our regular police officers, right? Like Minouche and Chris already said, the rights of families in dependency court cases and proceedings, that we don't have those same rights. In criminal proceedings, like police reports do not come into evidence. Social workers come into evidence with like even in they lie, multiple layers of hearsay, right? We don't get to confront the people who are making these accusations the same way we are required to in a criminal court. In criminal court, it could look like heroin, smell like heroin, taste like heroin. If they ain't got an expert saying that it's heroin, it gets thrown out. In dependency court, people just decide that their parents have a drug problem and they suffer from substance abuse, and people take that as fact, right? And I think we have I'm more afraid, if I'm as a parent myself, I am more afraid of the family police than I am of regular police.
And not only is the social worker's report admitted into evidence, right? Even though it's hearsay, but it's assumed to be true.
Yes, everything, even though they be lying.
And so the question becomes in children's court, not whether or not the document is true, it's assumed to be true, but whether or not, assuming it to be true, did the social worker prove their case? You know what I mean? That to me is absurd.
And I want to highlight something, guys, because, when I first started this work, I was so pissed off with the system that I put a lot of blame. I hated social workers. I'll just say I hated anyone that worked in the system. And when I started advocating more in the system and hearing from social workers and, finding my people within the system that I can co-conspire with, I realized that we need to really have a conversation about the responsibility and accountability that people that work within these systems have to not perpetuate the harm that's being done. I facilitated a training yesterday with the Child Welfare Development Services it was an anti-racism summit, and we had San Diego County, Imperial County, San Bernardino County, Riverside County, all these county Department of Children and Family Service organizations and folks. And I'm facilitating a training on, how they need to show up in these spaces when they really want to resist anti-racism. And what people don't realize is that we have become, and you used this word earlier, Keshia, complicit and complacent. We sign up for these jobs that are noble by definition, that we think are noble because we really truly believe the lie that we bought into, that children and families need saving from themselves and from their own families. We believe this. And so we lean in and we say we want to be a part of helping these children, saving these children, not centering these children, but saving these children. And we believe the lies we've been told, the policies that are in place, the training we've received, to the point where we don't question it. We believe it wholeheartedly. And we believe that if we are intervening in a family's life, that is for a reason. That report somebody made because they are a professional, they are a teacher, an educator, law enforcement, hospitals, doctors, whoever, that there is weight behind that, and we need to take it seriously. We don't look at the data and say that 90% of teachers that make referrals to the hotline are unsubstantiated because they're over-reporting on nonsense. We don't look at overall, when you look at all professionals who we trust that are over-reporting and that are literally playing a role in negatively impacting people's lives, that they're not even substantiated. But we don't ask ourselves, why am I continuing to engage in a behavior that is harmful? The system does not work unless we as individuals show up to do the job. If we all have a mass exodus and say, I'm not coming to work today in these fields that are causing harm, it doesn't work. So it literally takes us buying into these systems of oppression and showing up to do our job as we are told for the harm to happen. And so why we're but then the individual person, the social worker, the law enforcement, whoever, when true justice and accountability is on the table, they also take the blame. When Gabriel Fernandez was killed, The social worker was on trial, not the system, not the policies that allow for the bias and sometimes the laziness and the complacentness and complicitness to thrive and perpetuate the harm. That wasn't on trial. It was the individual person on trial. And so we as individuals in this child welfare space need to question everything. We need to say, what are the policies and practices and processes that are in place that we are told to follow, and question why we feel so compelled to implement them when we know deep down inside they're wrong. I speak with many social workers and people in this space who are like, I don't agree with this, but I have to do my job. When I was doing research and interviewing teachers and different mandated reporters, there is something which I coined in my report that's coming out, that's going through pre-publication. It's coming, y'all. It's coming. Where there's a term that I call role dissonance, where there's literally a cognitive dissonance that exists between the person that is in a role that has to execute a job, even though they understand the communities they come from, they understand that poverty is at play, they understand that racism is at play, but they can still comfortably and confidently walk into their job and execute the job, despite knowing all of these barriers and limitations and oppressions that exist against the family, but they are completely mentally separated from it. They could even cuss their kids out as a social worker or teacher in the morning before dropping them off to school and remove a child the same day for the same thing, where they are completely removed from their own actions because they have been, it is law. It is written in their policies and practices that this is my job, and they have somehow differentiated themselves as individuals and community members from the role itself. So what I love about what the Reimagined Child Safety Coalition is doing in partnership with Brandon Nichols, who is he's a different breed of director, where he's saying, here's the policies, let's look at them. Let's look at if they're harmful. Let's see what recommendations the community has to potentially address these issues, but we don't do that. We come into these roles with our cute little CEO titles or whatever we get, and we continue business as usual when we have a responsibility to question everything. We have a responsibility to look at the laws in place that we are perpetuating. And when I was at the training yesterday, speaking to supervisors of different counties who work in hotlines, they said that they were afraid that one, they thought they had to just accept every referral, not turn referrals away, not tell mandated reporters they can't take the report because it is not really founded on anything. They were told in their counties that they are to take every referral and investigate. And they didn't know until it took one person finally questioning their job to say, oh, this isn't something we have to do. Let's put a stop to it. But we're also afraid not to because we receive backlash and repercussions if we stop continuing, if we slow the machine down, because it's a process. When there's any deviation from the process, the whole system doesn't know how to act. But really helping, encouraging them to say, question the policies, question that feeling you get in your gut of, why am I doing this? Question is, if what we're doing in our roles as social workers or as agents in the system actually helping families? And if not, why am I here? And we can't say, oh, our systems are not racist because we've recruited Black and brown people to implement our harmful policies. That is insulting. That's all that is. It doesn't mean we're not biased. It doesn't mean, our system's not racist. It just means you have the audacity to recruit my people to hurt my people. That's all that means. So I know I just went on a whole little tangent, but my goodness. This is not a civil rights issue, but I want to, in our last 6 minutes, touch on the question in here, and you touched on this, Keshia, about medication. Our children are over-medicated, and that in itself is a civil rights issue. And let's be clear, kids are not medicated in the system because of something they experienced before they got there. They are medicated in the system because they are acting out and reacting to being in a system that they don't want to be in. And so the question from Randy Walker, hey, Randy, let me calm down. Hey, Randy, he said, can someone on the panel speak on the topic of children in foster care, especially our younger ones who do not have a voice, who are subjected to psychiatric prescriptions based on symptoms described by non-family members and following common adverse childhood events, possibly a misdiagnosis? So can we talk about how, in our last 5 minutes, that in and of itself is a civil rights issue? Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I would thoroughly agree, you know what I mean, with, just going back to the fact that children's civil rights within the foster care system are severely limited once they get involved there. You know what I mean? They don't even have the right to decide, probably even to decide on the doctor that's seeing them or diagnosing them. You know, something that DCFS is going to be, you know, given their own doctor who may have their own reasons for prescribing things, you know, like that. Second thing I just want to touch on really quickly is that you know, we're not in partnership with Brandon Nichols.
Correction. Working some things, Brandon Nichols. Yes.
Can I, that's so funny. Can I touch also on the medication piece? So remember earlier I was talking about the different, like $1,000 to $2,609 that's available for every child that's in a home. That number is dependent upon that child. Like if they're medicated, they're going to get that higher number, right? One of my students actually wrote I love teaching because I get to have all my research questions asked. Did a whole paper on this, so I can definitely provide that paper with their permission, just about the financial incentive that there is in prescribing. And then these are kids that don't have anyone that's going to, well, they do, they're supposed to have someone that's going to say, hey, pause, why are we giving this harmful medication? But it is, when we're looking at like the pharmaceutical companies, the doctors who are getting paid to prescribe this harmful medication to children, it's a part of it's part of the economy. Like all of this fuels the economy, right? Like it fuels the prison system we talked about earlier. It fuels the pharmaceutical, you know, companies and everything. So I'm happy to provide that again with my student's permission, but she did a very good job just really thoroughly fleshing out the harms.
I'd love to read that. I would love to read that. And y'all know we end on time around here. So I just want to, Dennis, I see your question. Dennis is one of our amazing CASA volunteers. So I have a whole, we can sit down, grab some coffee, and I can break that whole question down for you around why the definitions of neglect vary from state to state. But we're going to end here, and we're going to just want to first thank you all for your phenomenal contribution. You guys are just extremely brilliant. True advocates, true co-conspirators in this work, and we need more of each of you. And I'm just so incredibly grateful to be in this space with you. And we're going to end with showing a little clip of us marching in the Kingdom Day Parade a few weeks ago with our banners and our pride about really highlighting foster care as a civil rights issue. So if my team's ready, let's go ahead and play that quick little video, and then thank you all. And again, Happy New Year.
Keep it 100, I be feeling like who? Nobody. These finally understand when I land, I'm the man. You thought this was from Japan to the land. Suckers know what's up. I'm praying they overstand me. Every kid need a hero, I'm trying to be Uncle Stanley. R.I.P., all I see is concrete. Burn rubber glass splattered on the concrete. I heard love of lives matter, so when hearts leak, blood dripping live patterns on my ink, writing red when it's splattered, don't flatter me. Save your compliments, already know that my flow is bombing. We can toast to our old accomplishments, but I'd rather coast, move forward and talk my. They told me eat smoke, take your time, it's a long dinner. Eat smoke, take your time, it's a long dinner. Eat smoke, take your time, it's a long dinner. There's one queen and a few brothers, the last supper.